What's up, everyone? Welcome to the 31st episode of Super Brain Radio, the first episode of Chapter 7, Misfiring. And we're kind of realigning our original path after the previous chapter, Useful Tools, which kind of took a right-handed turn from the normal approach to awareness, appreciation, and brief and essential understanding of some of the more complex things in human physiology. Now, we are realigning to that awareness and appreciation based perspective today. We're talking about the hypothalamus, and this chapter is all about misfiring. And entirely, it's almost predicated on the concept of allostasis, which I believe we've covered before, but as a succinct reminder, everything encompassed by homeostasis, something that you've certainly heard of before, is really 7 variables that will essentially lead to acute mortality if they're messed with beyond any reasonable ranges, we'll call it. So this is like pH, sodium, calcium, glucose, oxygen, everything that comes to mind that's pretty much automatically handled already is in that 7 variables of homeostasis. Anything outside of that is technically subjected to the laws of adaptational thresholds, meaning based on environment, hormones, anticipation, all the wonders and miracles of human physiology can play out where for a brief or chronic or super chronic period of time, an altered threshold can be seen as acceptable and oftentimes preferred. That whole concept is what allows epic things like sports performance to even occur in the first place. How is the best athlete in every single respective sport really so different than the normal person? It's if you see them next to each other and watch them do the same exact things. I mean, look how much media content is created off that notion. For years we've had man versus athlete or man versus food, which is another funny one, but same concept, that how can the far end extreme be adapted to be so different than the baseline? And that's because of the laws of allostasis. Now, again, we're aligning our scope to the hypothalamus today. And whenever you think of nutrition, I want you to think of a crucial employee-employer relationship. Now, nutrition headquarters, so the group of employers, imagine it's like a conglomerate of a couple of different companies, we'll call it, where most of the employees are taken up by the hypothalamus, but there are some other key players outside the scope of this episode. The hypothalamus is going to be employing many things that we see in our nutritional escapades and goals. So maybe you want to talk about your pancreas's ability to secrete a total amount of insulin related to carbohydrate intake. And the reason that matters to everybody on the world is there's going to be times where you want to eat for enjoyment. Maybe it's a special meal, maybe you're just really working hard and you're starving all the time, or whatever it is, there's going to be times where you're going to eat an above normal amount of food. You need a pancreas who has flexible enough relationships with its employer, i.e. the hypothalamus, to anticipatorily secrete insulin for normal meals in a specific threshold, and then be able to manage handling more when you eat beyond what you're supposed to eat. It's all relatively simple to follow when I put it out this way, but the chemical signaling that occurs between the hypothalamus and everywhere else is not just complicated, it's more important to be appreciative of it, because anything else would actually be too inefficient. The complexity is an issue on our end and wrapping our heads around it. It's not an issue with the hypothalamus, because all this is inherently working very well. And that's just one small detail I just exposed you to. In reality, the hypothalamus has to do with body temperature regulation, with the actual functioning of your thyroid glands, and many more specific things within those large umbrellas as well. All in all, the thyroid and nutritional headquarter relationship, so that hypothalamus employer system, is going to be one of the most crucial things that we look at when we talk about longevity and adaptations compounding over time related to nutrition. So, if you want to be able to alter your body weight acutely or chronically, or body composition in any fashion, meaning increasing muscle mass, whatever, decreasing fat mass to get the same end outcome, that hypothalamus thyroid relationship needs to be in tip top shape. Furthermore, and again, outside the scope of this episode, the hypothalamus can directly impact sexual function and certain mood and emotion based behavior relationships. Hunger, thirst, all those little things that you might find on a Google search certainly happen here, but it's also far greater than that. So, the first piece of true understanding here is going to come from asking yourself why. And this is also the first bullet point. Far too often, when people make assessments, especially related to nutrition, it ends up sounding like, oh, the problem is you can't handle X. And if you just handled X better, then everything will be fixed. And we already recognize that the hypothalamus alone is far too complex for us to wrap our head around realistically. And talking about the entire cohort of all our nutritional organs and glands coming together and reducing it to something like that is pretty far-fetched. You're going to have to be crazy accurate and crazy specific to be anywhere in the ballpark of correct there. But more importantly, what's happening is the complex systems and nutrition headquarters that we've already spoken about are likely smarter than you because they've been doing this for how many years you've been alive for. They probably have some better data to go off of. So, you need to begin to view things as, why is this seen as some type of adaptive response by nutrition headquarters? They are blind. It's not about good or bad, it's about getting better. And if you are chronically doing something and you notice an end outcome, you need to retrace those steps and see how the steps have subsequently progressed to your end outcome. People tend to do this very well when it's something positive, but not when it's something negative. And that's why that reductionist, if you just handle X, then everything will get better, is going to be the main issue in your ability to understand this. So shifting your perspective is the only way to really begin to wrap your head around troubleshooting nutritional issues. Next is going to be exposure. Once you have a solid idea of maybe an enzyme you're deficient in, because that's extremely easy to target, then what you're going to do is allow yourself to responsibly be exposed to said target enzyme load, which means, let's say you notice that anything beyond 60 grams of carbohydrates coming from glucose at once, you tend to have some indigestion, but below 60, it's awesome and normal. And maybe you're also a sports performance athlete, and you realize like there's probably going to be some times where I may be participating in sport for over 2 hours, and I need to be able to handle more than 60 grams of glucose at once just to participate properly. So then what you need to do is you maybe add some type of aid, like a chromium or something more advanced to get you to 75. And you do 75 for whatever amount of time you can handle it. Maybe it's every other day, maybe it's every day, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's every 4 days, whatever it is to start. And as that exposure becomes more chronic and handled better, these enzymes related to glucose digestion will upregulate. This is the same general notion for all enzymes. Now, what's important to understand is dropping the stress bomb in this vulnerable and clearly under supported region of enzyme function is not a good choice because it's going to have a negative impact. Enzymes are pretty easy to follow, and that's why we use them for this example. So it needs to be the perfect amount of exposure, and that's why I use the adjective responsible. What exposure can you handle with minimal changes, if not being exactly the same as what you're used to? Then finally, hyper recover from that stressor. So if you realize that 75 is a little bit of a big of a jump, why don't you do some more glucose demanding exercise immediately before or after to facilitate that uptake of glucose? Now, it may be only in an ability to manage your stress hormone response because of that little burst of activity you did, but now it's in your system, it's been handled, and that data with success process has begun. And then you could do it again and again. And then suddenly, if you take the exercise portion away, you should respond roughly exactly the same because of previous data and anticipatory functions. So, all in all, you start to realize that it's more of steps in a forward and backward manner that are seen as data points by the hypothalamus. And furthermore, it's your ability to see those steps that's more important than understanding them. So if you notice that maybe after you do a certain dietary strategy for 6 to 8 weeks, it no longer feels the same and you no longer gain the same response that is desired, you then recognize, sure, maybe I need to change it, but if the same food suddenly acts like less, it's logical that you need more food to attain the same response. That's in fact a positive adaptation, and just because in this scenario you may be contraindicating laws that are true in other scenarios, it doesn't mean either of them are false. And that again is the beauty of the hypothalamus being anticipatory in function.